I had just said my final goodbye to my dying husband when I heard my children in the hospital corridor planning my murder. They thought they were being clever, but they had no idea that I already knew they had poisoned their father, and they definitely didn't know what I was about to do next. My name is Catherine Morrison, and I'm about to tell you the most horrifying story of my life. It's about discovering that the children you raised, loved, and sacrificed everything for are capable of the ultimate betrayal. But it's also about how a mother's love can turn into something far more dangerous when that love is destroyed. Chapter 1. The Perfect Family. For 35 years, I thought I had the perfect family. My husband Robert and I had built a beautiful life together. We owned Morrison Industries, a successful manufacturing company that Robert had grown from a small workshop into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. We had a gorgeous home in the hills overlooking the city, vacation properties in Aspen and the Hamptons. And most importantly, we had our 3 children, Michael, 32, Sarah, 30, and David, 28. All 3 of our children worked in the family business. Michael was vice president of operations, Sarah handled marketing and public relations, and David managed our international accounts. We had groomed them from childhood to take over the company someday. Every family dinner was filled with talk about business strategies, expansion plans, and the legacy we were building together. Robert and I were incredibly proud. We had created not just a successful business, but a dynasty that would support our family for generations to come. The company was worth approximately $12 million. And our personal assets brought our total net worth to around $15 million. But money was never the point. The point was our family. The point was leaving something meaningful for our children. The point was knowing that everything we had worked for would continue long after we were gone. Or so I thought. Chapter 2. The illness begins. It started 6 months ago with small things. Robert would complain of feeling tired, more tired than usual. He'd have occasional stomach pains that he attributed to stress from work. His appetite began to decrease, and he started losing weight. "It's just getting older, Kat," he'd tell me when I expressed concern. 58 isn't 28 anymore. But I knew my husband. In 35 years of marriage, Robert had rarely been sick. He was one of those people who seemed to have endless energy, who could work 12-hour days and still have enthusiasm for family dinners and weekend projects. The symptoms got worse. The fatigue became so severe that he could barely get through a workday. The stomach pains intensified to the point where he was doubled over in agony. He developed persistent nausea and began vomiting regularly. "We need to see a doctor," I insisted, after finding him collapsed on the bathroom floor one morning. "It's probably just a bug," he protested. But even he looked scared. Dr. Patterson, our family physician for over 20 years, was immediately concerned. The initial blood tests showed elevated liver enzymes and signs of severe dehydration. He referred us to a specialist at University Hospital. Chapter 3. The Diagnosis. Dr. Emily Chen, the gastroenterologist, was thorough and kind. She ran every test imaginable: CT scans, MRIs, endoscopies, more blood work. Robert and I spent weeks going from appointment to appointment, hoping for answers but dreading what we might find. The diagnosis, when it came, was devastating. Acute liver failure of unknown origin. "Unknown origin?" I asked, gripping Robert's hand in the sterile consultation room. "What does that mean?" "It means we can't identify what's causing his liver to fail," Dr. Chen explained gently. Sometimes this happens with certain medications. Sometimes it's autoimmune. Sometimes it's exposure to toxins. We're going to keep investigating, but right now our priority is treating the symptoms and exploring treatment options. Treatment options. That was medical speak for, we don't know how to fix this. The next few months were a blur of hospital visits, experimental treatments, and watching my husband of 35 years slowly waste away. Robert, who had always been strong and vibrant, became frail and yellow-tinged from jaundice. His abdomen swelled with fluid. His mind, once sharp as a razor in business negotiations, became foggy and confused. Our children were wonderfully supportive during this time. Michael took over most of Robert's responsibilities at the company. Sarah organized a schedule so that one of them was always at the hospital with us. David researched experimental treatments and reached out to specialists around the country. "We're going to get through this as a family," Sarah told me one evening as we sat in Robert's hospital room. "Whatever it takes." I was so grateful for them. In our darkest hour, our children were showing us exactly the kind of people we had raised them to be: loyal, loving, and willing to sacrifice for family. Chapter 4. The Final Weeks. By month 4, it was clear that Robert wasn't going to recover. The doctors had tried everything: medications, dietary changes, even discussions about a liver transplant that Robert was ultimately too weak to survive. "I want to go home," he told me one afternoon, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want to spend whatever time I have left in our house, in our bed, looking at our garden." So we brought him home. We hired round-the-clock nurses and converted our den into a medical suite. Hospice care began, focused on keeping Robert comfortable rather than treating his failing liver. The children visited every day. They would sit with their father, hold his hand, tell him about their days at work. Michael brought him reports from the company. Sarah showed him marketing materials she was working on. David updated him on the international accounts. "I'm so proud of all of you," Robert would tell them, tears in his eyes. "You're going to do amazing things with the company. Take care of your mother and take care of each other." During this time, I started noticing some odd things, but I was so focused on Robert's care that I didn't really process them at first. Michael had started asking a lot of questions about our wills and the estate planning. "I just want to make sure everything is properly organized, Mom," he explained when I mentioned it. Sarah had begun taking phone calls outside, often stepping out to the porch or the garage when her phone rang. When I asked about it, she said she was trying to keep work stress away from Dad. David had started bringing coffee and tea for the family when he visited. It was sweet of him, I thought. He knew how exhausted I was from caring for Robert, and he wanted to make sure I stayed caffeinated and alert. Chapter 5. The Discovery. Robert died on a Tuesday morning in October. I was holding his hand when he took his last breath, and our children were gathered around the bed. It was peaceful, as much as death can be peaceful. He simply closed his eyes and was gone. The funeral was 3 days later. The entire business community came to pay their respects. Robert had been well loved and respected, and the church was packed with colleagues, employees, friends, and family. After the burial, we came home to the usual post-funeral gathering. People brought food, shared memories, and offered condolences. By evening, most of the guests had left, and it was just me and the children. "Mom, we need to talk about some practical things," Michael said as we sat in the living room. "I know it's soon, but there are business decisions that can't wait. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, and not really in the mood for business discussions. But Michael was right. The company needed direction, and I was now the sole owner. "Can't it wait a few days?" I asked. "Unfortunately, no," Sarah chimed in. "We have that big contract with Henderson Industries that needs to be signed by the end of the week. And the bank is asking questions about the transition of leadership." As we talked, David got up to make tea. Again, I thought it was sweet of him to take care of these little details while we discussed heavy topics. He brought me a steaming mug of chamomile tea, my favorite for relaxation. "Drink this, Mom. It'll help you sleep tonight." I took a sip. It tasted slightly bitter, but chamomile sometimes does. I was about to take another sip when David's phone rang. "Sorry, I need to take this," he said, stepping outside. Through the window, I could see him pacing on the porch, and although I couldn't hear his words, his body language seemed tense, almost agitated. That's when Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and immediately looked toward the window where David was talking. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah, just work stuff," Sarah said, but something in her tone felt off. Michael's phone chimed with a text. He read it, looked at Sarah, then toward the window. A cold feeling started to creep up my spine. All three of my children were suddenly very interested in David's phone call, and all three were acting strange. I pretended to drink my tea, but I didn't swallow. Something was wrong. I couldn't put my finger on what, but some maternal instinct was screaming at me to be careful. "You know what?" I said, standing up slowly. "I think I'm going to go lie down. This has been the hardest day of my life." "Of course, Mom," Michael said, but he was still glancing toward the window. "Get some rest. We'll handle everything else." I went upstairs to my bedroom, but instead of lying down, I sat by the window that overlooked the porch. David was still on his phone, and now I could hear fragments of what he was saying. "Told you to wait until after the funeral. She almost drank the whole cup. Need to be more careful about the dosage." My blood ran cold. "Dosage? What dosage?" I opened the window slightly to hear better. "Look, I know what I'm doing," David was saying. "It worked perfectly with Dad, didn't it? No one suspected anything. The doctors were completely baffled. It worked with Dad." The words hit me like a physical blow. I had to grip the windowsill to keep from falling. "Just give me another week," David continued. "Maybe 2 at the most. She's already showing signs of stress and grief. When she starts getting sick, everyone will assume it's just the emotional toll of losing Dad." I couldn't breathe. I literally could not catch my breath. My children, my babies that I had carried, birthed, raised, loved unconditionally for 3 decades, had poisoned their father, and now they were planning to poison me. Chapter 6. The Plan Revealed. I sat frozen by that window for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. David finished his call and came back inside. I could hear the 3 of them talking in hushed tones downstairs. Moving as quietly as possible, I crept to the top of the stairs. Our house was old, and I knew exactly which floorboards creaked. I positioned myself where I could hear their conversation without being seen. "She didn't drink enough," Sarah was saying. "David, you said this would work." "It will work," David replied. I just need to adjust the amount. Dad took months because I was being cautious. With Mum, I can be more aggressive. More aggressive? Michael's voice carried a note of concern. What if someone gets suspicious? Who's going to be suspicious? David asked. She just lost her husband of 35 years. She's 62 years old. When elderly people die shortly after their spouses, everyone assumes it's a broken heart. But what if they do an autopsy? Sarah pressed. They won't, David said confidently. Dr. Patterson will sign off on natural causes, especially if her symptoms mirror Dad's. He'll assume it's some kind of genetic condition or environmental factor that affected them both. And you're sure this stuff is untraceable? Michael asked. Completely. I've been researching this for over a year. It mimics natural organ failure. Even if they did test for it, which they won't, it metabolizes so quickly that it's virtually undetectable within hours of death. A year. He'd been planning this for over a year. How much longer? Sarah asked. If I increase the dosage, maybe 2 weeks. 3 at the outside. And then we inherit everything, Michael said. $15 million, split 3 ways, Sarah added. Plus the company. Plus the company, David confirmed. Which we can sell immediately if we want. I've already had preliminary conversations with Peterson Holdings. They're interested in acquiring us for $20 million. $20 million? They were planning to murder both their parents for approximately $12 million each. I had to put my hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. Whether it would have been a sob or a scream, I don't know. What about the employees? Michael asked. Some of them have been with Dad since the beginning. That's Peterson's problem, David said coldly. We'll be rich enough that we won't need to worry about anyone else's feelings. I crept back to my bedroom and closed the door as silently as possible. Then I sat on my bed and tried to process what I had just learned. My husband was dead, murdered, by our children, and I was next. Chapter 7. The Evidence. The first thing I did was pour that tea down the bathroom sink. Then I rinsed the mug thoroughly and put it back on my nightstand, positioned as if I had drunk from it. The second thing I did was start thinking like the businesswoman I had been for 35 years. If I was going to survive this, I needed evidence. I needed proof. And I needed a plan. I waited until I heard the children leave. They each hugged me goodbye and told me how much they loved me, which now made my skin crawl. And then I went to work. First, I searched David's room. He still had a bedroom in our house from when he lived with us during graduate school, and he often stayed over when working late. In his dresser drawer, hidden under some old t-shirts, I found a small vial of clear liquid with no label. I photographed it with my phone and put it back exactly where I found it. Next, I went to Robert's home office. The children had been in here frequently over the past few months, supposedly handling business matters. I looked through the papers on his desk, his computer files, anything that might give me insight into what they had been planning. In the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet, I found documents that made my heart sink even further. They were preliminary agreements with Peterson Holdings about acquiring Morrison Industries. The documents were dated 3 months ago, right around the time Robert's symptoms had started getting worse. But here's what really caught my attention. The documents were signed by Michael, Sarah, and David. not Robert. They had been negotiating to sell the family company while their father was dying, without his knowledge or consent. Chapter 8. Building the Case. Over the next few days, I played the role of grieving widow, while secretly gathering evidence. I installed hidden recording apps on my phone. I placed small recording devices around the house, the kind designed for business meetings, which Robert had several of. I also did something that probably saved my life. I went to my doctor. "Dr. Patterson," I said, during an appointment I scheduled for grief counseling. "I'm concerned about my health. Robert's illness was so sudden and mysterious. Is there any chance it could have been something environmental? Something that might affect me too?" Dr. Patterson was immediately concerned. "That's actually a very good question, Catherine. Environmental toxins can indeed affect multiple family members. Let's run some comprehensive blood work and see if there are any early warning signs." The blood work showed elevated levels of several compounds that shouldn't have been in my system. Dr. Patterson was puzzled, but concerned enough to refer me to a toxicologist. Dr. Rebecca Martinez was a specialist in poisoning cases, though she usually worked with the police department. When she saw my blood work, her expression became very serious. "Mrs. Morrison, these levels suggest exposure to a very specific type of toxin. It's not something you would encounter naturally. How long have you been experiencing symptoms?" "I haven't been experiencing symptoms," I told her honestly. "I'm here because my husband just died of mysterious liver failure, and I was worried about environmental factors." Dr. Martinez stared at me for a long moment. "Mrs. Morrison, I think we need to talk about the possibility that your husband was poisoned, and based on these blood levels, someone may be trying to poison you as well." Chapter 9. The Recordings. Armed with medical evidence, I began recording everything. The children visited daily, and David continued bringing me tea and coffee. I accepted the drinks gratefully, praised him for being such a thoughtful son, and then poured them down the sink when he wasn't looking. The recordings I captured over the next week were damning. "She's not getting sick fast enough," Sarah complained during one visit. "It's been almost 2 weeks since Dad died." "I'm increasing the dose," David replied. "But we have to be careful. If she gets sick too quickly, people might start asking questions." "What people?" Michael asked. "We're her only family." "The lawyers, for one. When we go to read the will, if she looks too sick, they might suggest postponing until she's feeling better." "When is the will reading?" Sarah asked. "Next Friday," Michael answered. "I've been in touch with Harrison and Associates. Mum has an appointment to review Dad's will and discuss the transfer of assets." "And if she's dead by then?" David asked. "Then we meet with them to discuss our inheritance," Michael said matter-of-factly. I was recording this conversation from the kitchen while they talked in the living room. Hearing my children discuss my death with the same tone they might use to plan a grocery shopping trip was almost more than I could bear. But the worst was yet to come. "I still think this is taking too long," Sarah said. "What if we just helped things along?" "What do you mean?" David asked. "I mean, what if Mum had an accident? A fall down the stairs, maybe? She's been so distraught since Dad died. She's been forgetting things, stumbling around. It would be believable." "That's risky," Michael said. "Physical trauma shows up in autopsies." "Not if the trauma is consistent with an accidental fall," Sarah argued. And if she already has toxins in her system that have weakened her, a fall could easily be fatal. I like it, David said. We could do it this weekend. Make it look like she fell while carrying laundry down the stairs or something. They were planning to murder me in 3 days. Chapter 10. The Confrontation. I had enough evidence. Between the recordings, the blood work, the vial in David's room, and the business documents, I had everything I needed to destroy them. But I wanted them to know. I wanted them to understand that they had underestimated the woman who had raised them. On Thursday evening, the night before they planned to kill me, I invited all 3 of them over for dinner. I want to cook for my children, I told them. It's been such a difficult time, and I want us to have a family meal together, just the 4 of us. They came, of course. They were probably thinking it would be their last family dinner, and they were right, just not in the way they expected. I prepared a beautiful meal: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, fresh bread, their favorite dishes from childhood. I set the dining room table with our best china and silver. "This is lovely, Mom," Sarah said as we sat down. "You didn't need to go to all this trouble." "It's no trouble," I replied, smiling warmly. "Family is the most important thing in the world. Don't you think?" They all agreed, nodding and making conversation about work and their lives. David offered to get drinks for everyone. "Actually," I said, "I'll handle the drinks tonight. I have something special planned." I went to the kitchen and returned with a bottle of wine and 4 glasses. I poured carefully, making sure each glass had exactly the same amount. "A toast," I said, raising my glass, "to family, to loyalty, to the people who love us unconditionally." We clinked glasses, and they all took sips of their wine. I pretended to drink from mine. "This is nice, Mom," Michael said. "It's good to see you taking care of yourself." "Oh, I'm taking very good care of myself," I replied. "In fact, I've been taking care of myself much better than you might think." Something in my tone must have caught their attention, because all 3 of them looked at me with new focus. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. I smiled and pulled out my phone. I tapped the recording app and set it on the table. "I mean, for example, that I haven't actually been drinking the tea and coffee that David has been bringing me. Isn't that interesting?" David's face went pale. "Mom, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about this," I said, pulling out a printed copy of the toxicology report. "These are the results of blood work I had done last week. It shows significant levels of a very rare toxin in my system. The same toxin that killed your father." The silence at the table was deafening. "I'm also talking about this," I continued, placing the recordings device on the table. "I've been recording our conversations for the past week. Would you like to hear some highlights?" I pressed play. Their own voices filled the dining room. "She's not getting sick fast enough." "I'm increasing the dose." "What if Mom had an accident? A fall down the stairs?" Michael was the first to speak. "Mom, this isn't what it sounds like." "Really?" I asked. "Because it sounds like my 3 children murdered their father and were planning to murder their mother for money. Is that not what it sounds like?" Sarah started crying. "Mom, please, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I said, my voice deadly calm. "I understand that I raised 3 monsters. I understand that you killed the man I loved more than life itself. And I understand that you were planning to kill me tomorrow night. How did you... David started, then stopped himself. How did I know? Because unlike you, I'm not stupid. Did you really think I wouldn't notice that you were bringing me drinks constantly? Did you think I wouldn't question why all three of you were suddenly so interested in the business finances? Did you think I wouldn't eventually hear you planning my murder? Chapter 11. The Revelation. Now, I continued, let me tell you what you didn't know. What you couldn't have known, because you're so blinded by greed that you never bothered to actually understand the business you were planning to inherit. I pulled out another set of documents and spread them on the table. These are the real ownership papers for Morrison Industries. Your father and I restructured the company 5 years ago after some very expensive business advice. The company is not owned by us personally. It's owned by a trust. Their faces were becoming more and more pale as I spoke. A trust that is managed by Harrison and Associates, with very specific instructions about succession. If both your father and I die, the trust does not automatically transfer to you. It transfers to a charity that provides college scholarships for underprivileged children. David's mouth fell open. That's impossible. Is it? Your father and I discussed this extensively. We were concerned about raising entitled children who would never understand the value of hard work. We wanted to ensure that if something happened to us, our money would go to people who truly needed it. But the will, Michael started. The will leaves you each a modest inheritance, $50,000 each plus some personal items. Everything else, the house, the investments, the business, goes to charity. Sarah was openly sobbing now. You can't do this to us. I'm not doing anything to you, I replied. You did this to yourselves when you decided to murder your parents for money. But what about all our work at the company? David asked desperately. We've devoted our lives to that business. And you'll be compensated for that work right up until the day you're arrested, I said. Which, by the way, will be tomorrow morning. Arrested? Michael's voice was barely a whisper. Oh yes. Dr. Martinez, the toxicologist, is very interested in this case, as is Detective Williams from the police department. They'll be here at 9 a.m. tomorrow with the warrants for your arrest. Chapter 12. The Final Twist. But here's the thing, I continued, enjoying the look of terror on their faces. I'm not completely heartless. You are still my children, even if you are murderers. So I'm going to give you one chance. Hope flickered in their eyes. The wine you just drank, I said calmly, contains the same toxin you've been giving me. The same toxin you used to kill your father. The hope died instantly, replaced by stark terror. However, I continued, unlike your slow-acting poison, this dose is designed to be neutralized if you receive the antidote within 2 hours. What antidote? Sarah gasped. Dr. Martinez provided it to me. It's upstairs in my bedroom safe. The combination is your father's birthday. They started to get up, but I held up my hand. Sit down, I'm not finished. They sat, but they were clearly panicked now. You have 2 choices. Choice 1. You can go upstairs, get the antidote, save your lives, and then spend the rest of those lives in prison for murder. Choice 2. You can accept the consequences of your actions and let the poison do its work. You're bluffing, David said. but his voice shook. You wouldn't kill your own children. Wouldn't I? I asked. You killed your own father. You were planning to kill your own mother. Why should I be any different from you? Because you're not a monster like us, Sarah sobbed. No, I agreed, I'm not. Which is why I'm giving you the choice your father never had. Michael was holding his stomach. I feel sick. The symptoms start quickly, I informed him. You have about an hour and 45 minutes left. Please, Mom, David begged. We're sorry. We made a terrible mistake. You made a terrible choice, I corrected. And now you get to make another one. Chapter 13. The Decision. They chose the antidote, of course. They stumbled upstairs, fought over the safe combination. Apparently, none of them remembered their father's birthday on the first try, and found the small vial of clear liquid that Dr. Martinez had prepared. I sat at the dinner table and listened to them arguing about who should drink first, whether there was enough for all three, whether I was telling the truth about any of it. There was enough antidote. I'm not a murderer, unlike my children. When they came back downstairs, looking weak but relieved, I was waiting with my phone in my hand. I've just called Detective Williams, I announced. He and his team will be here in 15 minutes. You said tomorrow morning, Michael protested. I lied. You should be familiar with lying by now. Mom, please, Sarah pleaded. Can't we work this out? Can't we? Can't we what? Pretend you didn't murder your father. Pretend you weren't planning to murder me. Pretend you actually love me instead of just loving my money. We do love you, David said desperately. No, you don't. You love what you thought I could give you. There's a difference. The police sirens were already audible in the distance. Here's what's going to happen, I told them. You're going to be arrested for the murder of Robert Morrison and the attempted murder of Catherine Morrison. You're going to be tried, convicted, and sentenced to life in prison. The company will be dissolved and its assets distributed to charity. This house will be sold, and the proceeds will also go to charity. What about you? Michael asked. What will you do? I'm going to live, I said simply. I'm going to travel. I'm going to read books and see museums and eat in restaurants your father and I always wanted to try. I'm going to live the life he would have wanted me to live. And you're going to do it alone, Sarah said bitterly. Yes, I agreed. I'm going to do it alone, because the people I thought would be with me turned out to be killers. Chapter 14. The Aftermath. The trial was a sensation. The media called it the Morrison murder case and the inheritance killers. The toxicology evidence was overwhelming. The recordings were damning. The business documents showed clear motive. All three of my children were convicted of first-degree murder and attempted murder. They each received life sentences without the possibility of parole. During the victim impact statement, I looked at them sitting at the defendant's table and felt nothing. No love, no hate, no sadness. They had become strangers to me the moment I heard them planning my death. Robert Morrison was a good man, I told the court. He built a business from nothing, employed hundreds of people, and loved his family unconditionally. He deserved to live to see his grandchildren, to retire and enjoy the fruits of his labor, to die peacefully in his own bed surrounded by people who truly loved him. Instead, he died slowly and painfully, poisoned by the children he sacrificed everything for. His trust was betrayed by the people he trusted most. As for me, I've learned that blood relations don't guarantee love, and love can't survive betrayal. I've lost my husband and my children in the same year, but only one of those losses breaks my heart. Chapter 15. The New Life. That was 2 years ago. I'm now 64 years old, and I'm living a life I never could have imagined. I sold the house and most of our possessions. I kept a few meaningful items. Photos of Robert, some jewelry, books we'd read together. Everything else went to auction, with the proceeds going to various charities. I bought a small, comfortable apartment in the city and began traveling. I've been to Italy, where Robert and I always wanted to go. I've seen the northern lights in Iceland. I have walked on beaches in Thailand and toured museums in Paris. I have also started volunteering with an organization that helps victims of family violence. It turns out that being betrayed by family members is more common than I thought, though usually not quite as dramatic as my situation. I've met other women who discovered their children stealing from them, abusing them, manipulating them for money. I've met elderly people whose families saw them as nothing more than potential inheritances. I've met parents who had to cut contact with their own children for their own safety and sanity. It's sad but liberating to realize that I'm not alone in this experience. Chapter 16. The Letters. My children write to me from prison. Not all of them, and not regularly. But I get letters. Michael's letters are angry. He blames me for their situation, claims they were driven to murder by pressure to succeed in the family business. He insists that if I had just accepted their plan, everyone would have been better off. David's letters are manipulative. He alternates between claiming innocence, we never meant for Dad to die, and trying to guilt me into helping with appeals. Don't you love us enough to fight for us? Sarah's letters are the hardest to read because they seem genuinely remorseful. She talks about understanding the magnitude of what they did, about the therapy she's receiving in prison, about wanting to become a better person even if she spends the rest of her life behind bars. I don't respond to any of the letters. There's nothing left to say. Chapter 17. The Questions. People often ask me how I could turn in my own children, how I could testify against them in court, how I could live with myself knowing they'll die in prison. The answer is simple. They stopped being my children the moment they decided to murder their father. The 3 people I raised, loved, and sacrificed for would never have committed such a crime. Those people died somewhere along the way, replaced by strangers who wore their faces and shared their DNA, but had none of their humanity. I don't feel guilty about their imprisonment because I didn't put them there. Their choices put them there. I don't feel sad about their fate because they showed no sadness about planning mine. I don't feel obligated to forgive them because forgiveness requires remorse, and true remorse requires accepting responsibility. As long as they continue to blame me, pressure, or circumstances for their decision to commit murder, they haven't taken responsibility for anything. Chapter 18. The Inheritance. The irony of the whole situation is that if my children had simply waited, they would have inherited everything anyway. Robert and I had planned to retire in 5 years and transfer the business to them gradually. We had set up our wills to leave them the house, the investments, everything we had worked for. We changed those wills only after we started noticing their behavior during Robert's illness. The way they focused on business matters instead of his health. The way they asked questions about assets and insurance. The way they seemed almost impatient for him to die. We didn't know they were poisoning him, but we could see that they cared more about their inheritance than his life. So we changed our wills. We restructured the business. We made sure that if they were truly just waiting for us to die, they would be disappointed. It turned out to be the smartest decision we ever made. Chapter 19. The investigation continues. After my children were convicted, the police investigation expanded. They wanted to know how long the poisoning had been going on, whether there were other victims, where David had obtained the toxin. What they discovered was chilling. David had been researching untraceable poisons for over 2 years. His internet search history was extensive and detailed. He had contacted suppliers in 3 different countries before finding one willing to sell the particular compound he used. The poison itself was a rare industrial chemical that, in small doses over time, caused exactly the symptoms Robert had experienced. It was nearly impossible to detect without knowing specifically what to look for. And even then, only within a narrow window after exposure. David had been dosing Robert for almost 6 months before his death. What I had interpreted as a gradual illness was actually a gradual murder. The investigation also revealed that my children had been planning this for much longer than I realized. They had opened secret bank accounts in preparation for their inheritance. They had researched property purchases in other states. Sarah had even applied for a passport under her maiden name. They weren't just planning to kill us. They were planning to disappear afterward. Chapter 20. The business employees. One of the hardest parts of the aftermath was dealing with the employees of Morrison Industries. Many of them had worked for Robert for decades. They considered him family, and they were devastated by his death. When the truth came out about how he died, the shock rippled through the entire company. People who had trusted and worked closely with Michael, Sarah, and David felt betrayed and horrified. We watched them at the funeral, one of the longtime employees told me. They seemed so devastated. We felt so sorry for them, losing their father so young. To find out they killed him, the company couldn't survive the scandal. Even though the assets were going to charity, no one wanted to do business with the murder company. We had to close Morrison Industries and sell the assets piecemeal. 200 people lost their jobs because of my children's greed. That might be the part I can never forgive them for. Robert and I could defend ourselves, at least to some extent. Those employees were innocent victims of a crime they didn't even know was happening. Chapter 21. The Media Circus. The case attracted national attention. News crews camped outside the courthouse during the trial. Magazine shows did exposés on killer children and inheritance murders. Documentary filmmakers wanted to interview me. I turned down all media requests. This wasn't entertainment. It was the destruction of my family and the murder of my husband. I had no interest in turning our tragedy into someone else's profit. But I couldn't control what other people said about the case. Some of the coverage was respectful, focusing on the legal and investigative aspects. Much of it was sensationalized, treating the whole thing like a soap opera. The worst was when they started speculating about what kind of parents Robert and I had been. Had we somehow created killers through our parenting? Were we too strict, too permissive, too focused on money? Those questions haunted me more than I want to admit. I've spent countless hours wondering if we did something wrong, if there were signs we missed, if we could have prevented this somehow. Chapter 22. The Therapy. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the therapist I started seeing after the trial, helped me work through some of these feelings. Catherine, she told me during one of our sessions, millions of parents raise children in business families. Millions of parents have money and expect their children to work for it. The vast majority of those children don't become murderers. But maybe we spoiled them, I argued. Maybe we gave them too much, made them feel entitled. Maybe, Dr. Walsh agreed. But entitlement leads to demanding behavior, not murder. What your children did required a level of premeditation and coldness that goes far beyond anything normal parenting mistakes could create. Then what went wrong? I don't know, she said honestly. Sometimes people make choices that can't be explained by their upbringing or circumstances. Sometimes people choose evil, and there's no deeper reason for it. That was hard to accept, but it was also liberating. I couldn't spend the rest of my life searching for explanations that might not exist. Chapter 23. The Unexpected Discovery. About a year after the trial, I was going through some of Robert's old papers when I found something that changed everything I thought I knew about the situation. Hidden in a file folder labeled Tax Documents 2019 was a letter Robert had written, but never sent. It was addressed to me, dated just 2 weeks before his symptoms started getting severe. My dearest Catherine, it began. If you're reading this, it means something has happened to me, and you found this letter while settling my affairs. My hand shook as I continued reading. I've become suspicious about my illness. The symptoms don't match any natural disease pattern I can research, and they seem to get worse after family dinners or when the children visit. I pray I'm wrong about this, but I think one or more of our children might be trying to hurt me. I don't want to accuse them without proof, and I can't bear the thought of destroying our family over suspicions. But I need you to know that if something happens to me, you should be very, very careful. I've hidden this letter where I hope you'll find it eventually. I've also taken the precaution of changing our wills and business structure without telling the children. If they are planning what I think they're planning, they'll be disappointed. Catherine, if I'm wrong about this, please forgive a sicker old man's paranoid thoughts. If I'm right, please know that I tried to protect you the only way I could. I love you more than words can express. Be careful. Be smart. Be suspicious. Your devoted husband, Robert. I sat in his office and cried for hours after reading that letter. Robert had known. He had suspected what was happening to him, and he had tried to protect me even while he was dying. He had changed the wills and business structure not because he noticed the children's behavior during his illness, but because he suspected they were causing his illness. My brilliant, careful husband had set a trap for his own children, hoping he was wrong, but preparing for the possibility that he was right. Chapter 24. The Final Confrontation. I took Robert's letter to Detective Williams. It didn't change the legal case. My children were already convicted and imprisoned, but it provided closure to some lingering questions about the investigation. More importantly, it gave me the strength to do something I'd been avoiding. I went to visit Sarah in prison. Of my 3 children, Sarah's letters had seemed the most genuinely remorseful. I wanted to see if that remorse was real, and I wanted her to know that her father had suspected what they were doing. The visiting room at the women's correctional facility was sterile and depressing. Sarah looked older than her 32 years, thinner, with dark circles under her eyes. When she saw me walk in, she started crying immediately. "Mom," she said as we sat down across from each other at a small table, "I can't believe you came." "I almost didn't," I told her honestly. "But I have something you need to see." I handed her a copy of Robert's letter. She read it slowly, and I watched her face change from confusion to horror to understanding. "He knew," she whispered. "He suspected," I corrected. "And he tried to protect me." Sarah was sobbing now. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry. I know that doesn't change anything, but I need you to know that I think about what we did every single day. I hate myself for it." "Why?" I asked. "Why did you do it? Help me understand." She was quiet for a long time, gathering her thoughts. "I don't know if I can explain it in a way that makes sense," she finally said. "It started with David. He was always the smartest one, always had the big ideas. He came to us about a year before Dad got sick and said he'd figured out a way for us to inherit everything sooner rather than later. He made it sound so clinical, so logical. He said Dad and Mom were going to live for another 20 or 30 years. And by then, we'd be too old to really enjoy the money. He said they'd probably end up giving most of it to charity anyway. He made it sound like we were just expediting an inevitable process." "And you believe that?" "I wanted to believe it," Sarah admitted. "I was tired of working for Dad, tired of feeling like I'd never be good enough, tired of living in his shadow. I thought, if we inherited the company, we could finally prove ourselves." "But it was murder, Sarah. You had to know it was murder. We didn't think of it that way at first. David said it would be like Dad was just going to sleep, peaceful, painless. We convinced ourselves it was almost merciful. And when you saw him suffering, that's when I started having doubts. But by then it was too late. David said if we stopped, Dad might recover and figure out what we'd done. He said we'd go to prison anyway, so we might as well finish what we started." "And planning to kill me?" Sarah looked down at her hands. "I was against that at first, but David said you'd be suspicious about Dad's death, that you might start investigating. He said it was the only way to be safe. So you agreed to murder your mother to cover up murdering your father?" "Yes," she whispered. "And I will regret that decision for the rest of my life." Chapter 25. The Question of Forgiveness. "Do you want me to forgive you?" I asked Sarah. She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. "I want you to, but I don't think I deserve it." "You don't," I agreed. "But that's not really the point. The point is whether forgiveness would help you become a better person, or whether it would just make you feel better about being a terrible person." "I don't know the difference." "The difference is this. If I forgive you, will you use that forgiveness to justify what you did? Will you tell yourself that if your own mother can forgive you, then what you did wasn't really that bad?" "No," Sarah said quickly. "What we did was unforgivable. Even if you forgave me, I'd still know that we murdered Dad and tried to murder you. Nothing can change that." Or will you use forgiveness as motivation to spend the rest of your life trying to atone? Will you try to become the kind of person who deserves forgiveness, even if you never actually receive it? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. I hope, the second one. I'm already trying to do that. I'm in therapy here. I'm tutoring other inmates who want to get their GEDs. I'm trying to be useful, to help people instead of hurting them. Good, I said. Then here's what I will give you. I won't forgive you because what you did is unforgivable. But I will hope that you find a way to forgive yourself by becoming someone worth forgiving. That's more than I deserve. Yes, it is. Use it wisely. Chapter 26. The Brothers. I didn't visit Michael or David. Based on their letters, neither of them had reached the level of genuine remorse that Sarah had shown. Michael was still angry and blaming everyone but himself. David was still trying to manipulate me into helping with appeals. But I did write them each a letter. I wanted them to know about Robert's letter, about his suspicions, about how their plan had been doomed from the beginning. Michael's response was predictably furious. He wrote back accusing me of lying, claiming I had forged Robert's letter to make them look worse. He said I was a vindictive old woman who had destroyed her own family out of spite. David's response was more calculated. He questioned the timing of my discovery of the letter. He suggested that even if the letter was real, it didn't prove anything about their guilt. He implied that I might have planted evidence to ensure their conviction. Neither response surprised me. Both of my sons were exactly who I thought they were. People incapable of taking responsibility for their actions. The difference between them and Sarah wasn't that Sarah was less guilty. All three of them had participated equally in Robert's murder and the plan to kill me. The difference was that Sarah was capable of genuine remorse, while her brothers were only capable of self-pity and anger. Chapter 27. The New Family. One unexpected outcome of this whole experience has been finding a new kind of family. Dr. Martinez, the toxicologist who helped save my life, has become a close friend. We have lunch once a month, and she's taught me a lot about poison detection and prevention. It's morbid knowledge, but it makes me feel more secure. Detective Williams and his partner Detective Rodriguez still check in on me occasionally. They've told me that my case has helped them solve other suspicious deaths that might have been classified as natural causes. I've also connected with other families who have been through similar experiences. There's a support group for people whose relatives have committed violent crimes against family members. It's a small, sad group, but we understand each other in ways that no one else can. And there are the charity recipients. The organizations that received money from the dissolution of Morrison Industries send me updates about their work. I have met some of the scholarship recipients who are going to college with money that was originally meant for my children's inheritance. These young people are grateful, hardworking, and hopeful in ways that my own children never were, despite having so much less. They remind me that good people do exist, and that money can be used for genuine good when it's given to the right people. Chapter 28. The Dreams. I still dream about Robert sometimes. In the dreams, he's healthy and young, and we're planning our future together. Sometimes we're designing the house we always wanted to build. Sometimes we're discussing business expansion plans. Sometimes we're just sitting on a porch somewhere, talking about books we've read. I never dream about my children. It's as if my subconscious has completely erased them from my emotional life. I think that's probably healthy. They chose to remove themselves from my life when they chose to murder my husband and plot my death. My dreams are simply acknowledging that reality. The dreams about Robert are bittersweet but comforting. They remind me of what real love looks like, what genuine partnership feels like, what it means to share a life with someone who would never hurt you. Those dreams help me understand the difference between the family I thought I had and the family I actually had. Chapter 29. The lessons. If there's anything I've learned from this experience, it's that love alone isn't enough to create good people. Children need boundaries, consequences, and the understanding that actions have results. Robert and I gave our children everything they wanted, but we didn't teach them to value what they received. We showed them unconditional love, but we didn't require them to show love in return. We taught them that family was the most important thing, but we didn't teach them what family really means. Family means protecting each other, not exploiting each other. Family means sacrifice, not selfishness. Family means loyalty, not murder. I don't think different parenting would have prevented what happened. As Dr. Walsh reminded me, most children from wealthy families don't become killers. But maybe different parenting would have created different people. People who would have waited for their inheritance, or people who would have built their own success instead of stealing ours. Chapter 30. The Present. Today is the 2-year anniversary of Robert's death. I'm writing this story from a small cafe in Prague, where I'm spending the month exploring a city Robert and I always wanted to visit. I think about him every day, but the sharp pain of grief has softened into something more manageable. I can remember our good times without being overwhelmed by the tragedy of how he died. I don't think about my children very often anymore. When I do, it's with a kind of distant sadness, like thinking about characters in a tragic novel. They feel more like cautionary tale than like people I once loved. Tomorrow I'm flying to Vienna, then on to Budapest. Next month I'm going to Iceland to see the Northern Lights. These are all trips Robert and I planned but never took. I'm living the life he would have wanted me to live. And I'm living it in honor of the man he was, not in spite of the way he died. The end.